Hi, well, I thought I'd give you guys a demonstration very quickly of a very simple base to a figure. I'm working on an Orc Boys regiment, and if there's one thing I think is underrated, it is a good base to a model. And this does not need to be anything in particular. It doesn't need to be fancy. It just needs to be done cleanly and well. And so what I'm going to do is show you how to make a base that I use for a lot of my models. And it's just with some bestial brown. Take out a good splodge of it. Mix in a lot of water. And why I'm mixing so much water is because for this particular model I've sprayed white. If you're working from a black undercoat, then you're going to need obviously a thicker brown coat to shine through. Now, if you look at the model, this is just with washes. There's nothing fancy, there's no highlighting, and I've chosen to do this because I want to show you that even on the most basic painted model, the difference made by a good base is really important. Okay, so you just dab it on really generously, making sure that you get every spot. Doesn't matter if you go over the boots a lot or a little bit even, because they've been tramping through the mud, so they're going to be a bit muddy. Now I leave the sides alone, sides of the base, because later on I'm going to paint that black, and I choose to do that because I think it really allows the model to look like it's got a sort of deliberate border. And the way I see it is, when you have a painting in an art gallery, you don't just leave the canvas hanging up on the wall, you make sure it's mounted on something nice to frame it, to increase its impact. And that's what I think a base does to a miniature. Okay, so because that's quite wet, that's going to take a little while to dry. Normally when you're painting a whole regiment, by the time you've finished, the first one's dried and you can move on. But that one's going to take a little while to dry, so join me again in a couple of minutes. Okay, so now the base has dried. What I use next is Torcept ochre, but you can use just lighted up bestial brown using bleached bone or anything else that you prefer. I like it because it just gives that just slightly sandy, dry texture to the base that makes it look like it's a battlefield that's well trodden. So just take a bit on your brush. I like to use a bit of an old knackered brush for this part, and I don't know if you can see very well, but you just sort of lightly brush over the textured areas and it just lightens up the brown of the muddy base. You can be quite messy, quite not brutal, but forceful with the application of the paint. And don't worry about any parts of the base that aren't covered now with the sand that might have come off because the glue wasn't enough to hold it all down, because that can get covered with grass later. And then as soon as you've done that, you just wash out the brush and take some black paint, and this is the magical bit that turns your well painted figure into a nicely presented figure. So this is the gilt edged frame around the classic oil painting. You can see, just making sure that I'm applying it evenly across the base, making sure I have that nice sharp line across the top, that it's not bleeding into the brown of the painted base. And there you have, that's bad lighting, there you have the finished model with the the edging around it, and then all you do after that is spray your varnish over that, wait for that to dry, and apply the grass, and it looks like a well-framed, attractive model.